Hey guys, welcome to our last year-round gardening workshop for this summer. Excited to have you guys here. And I see we've already got some people that are introducing yourselves in the comments section. Delco, Idaho. I actually grew up in Idaho. Texas, I'm seeing Lincoln, Nebraska, Arkansas. So as we're kind of waiting for people to sign in, why don't you guys go ahead and tell us where you're from and tell me if you have a cold frame or a hoop house, something that you are going to be able to use to extend your growing season. I'm curious to know who that's here today has actually has things ready, or if you're going to be building them or what. And I'll ask you the question if you're going to choose to build one, but I'm interested right now to know if people already have one. All right, we've got people here from New Jersey, Indiana, Lincoln in the UK, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Louisiana. Kathy's saying she has an old chicken coop that she wants to convert. Cool, that's a fun idea. Don't have any protective shelters yet. Anne's saying she has a small cold frame and a small hoop house. Carmine is saying use recycled stuff. We're going to talk about that. Rita is saying build a couple. All right, cool. Okay, guys, welcome again to those of you that are new. You may want to go back and take a look at some of the others. I'm not saying leave this one there. All of these workshops are standalone, so you'll learn things here. But if you didn't make it to the earlier workshops that we had earlier in the week, on Monday, we talked about the best crops for planting for fall and winter. And then Wednesday, we talked about planting times and when you should actually be getting them in. We'll review both of those just a little bit today. But if you want to go back and watch those, there's links that you can watch the replays in this video. So you can go watch those links. And we're up to about 50 people here. So I think that we will go ahead and get started. So today, I'm going to take just really quick, because I know some of you have already been here, but some of you will be new. I'm going to take just a minute and talk about why we garden all year long and kind of what brought us to that. Then we're going to do just a quick summary of planting times and crops to grow. And then we're going to talk about fabric grow covers, hoop houses, and cold frames. We've got a prize drawing. Again, today we're going to be giving away a copy of the Year-Round Gardening Master Course. And we'll talk about that master course for a little bit, and then we'll do some Q&A. So for those of you that have questions as we're going through, I'm going to be teaching for today. It's about a half an hour's worth of stuff that I'm going to be covering. We're going to go a little bit more in depth and talk about cold frames and hoop houses in particular. So got a little bit more information for you today than I did on Wednesday. So while I'm teaching, it's a little bit hard for me to read the comments. And so if you have questions, hold on to them. We're going to do a whole Q&A section. We usually spend about a half an hour talking and going through the questions and answering your questions. So just maybe hang on to those. Then when we get towards the end of the presentation, you can go ahead and do your questions. Start them off with 3 question marks before. That will help my wife, AJ, who is currently monitoring the feed. That'll help her to identify those questions, and then she kind of flags those for us so that I can put those on the screen and get those questions answered. And then the other thing is, please keep your questions limited to today's topic. So we're not going to talk about squash bugs. We're not going to talk about corn. We're going to talk about year-round gardening and cold frames and hoop houses in particular. So try to kind of keep your questions to those topics. A lot of times if we get a question that's pretty much off topic, AJ will just kind of ignore that one. So keep your questions on topic for today. There's other opportunities for you to ask me other questions at other times. All right, we're up to 60 people. So welcome again, everybody. And let's get into it and talk about this topic. So we love year-round gardening, and especially me. I fell in love with year-round gardening 15 years ago. It's my favorite topic. It's the first class I ever taught. I did a live class at a local church teaching them about year-round gardening, and I've taught that live class several times since in homes and churches and conservation gardens and all kinds of stuff. I love year-round gardening. And kind of the thing that got us started in this year-round gardening is back in 2009, we were right smack in the middle of raising our kids. So all of our kids were little. We had one teenager and the rest were all still pretty young. And we were kind of talking about how, we feed our kids. And part of the reason why we started gardening when we first got married is we wanted to have good, healthy, organic, chemical-free produce for our family. But we were talking and we were like, we eat so much better in the summertime than we do in the winter because, during the summer, we have tomatoes and cucumbers and berries and apples and, zucchini and melons and all this stuff that are coming fresh out of our garden that we're eating constantly. And that, it just made for a very good, healthy diet, starting really probably in late April, all the way through till about October. We ate really good, lots of fresh produce that was our own homegrown produce. But as the winter approached, now we did can, and we still can. We do quite a bit of canning. We do quite a bit of freezing, a little bit of drying of herbs and things as well. But even with all of that, we still weren't eating as good. We just weren't eating as healthy because we didn't have that fresh produce. So we started wanting to figure out how to do that. And we happened to be down in Southern California at one of the amusement parks, and they were growing broccoli and cabbage and kale and lettuce and all these kind of things in the flower beds around the attractions. And we thought, wow, how cool is that? In the middle of the winter, because this was in January that we were there, how cool is it to be able to do that? But we didn't want to move to Southern California to do that. We wanted to stay put where we were, where our family was. And so we started doing a little investigation. And when I got home, I did some study and spent some time on the internet and found a few books. Let me show you those books really quick. So the two books that I read were Elliot Coleman's book, Four Season Harvest, which is excellent. He's kind of the grandfather of year-round gardening, by the way. And then I also read Nikki Jabour's book, Year-Round Vegetable Gardener. Both of these books were really influential in helping me to understand how to do this and how to make it successful in our Zone 6 garden. So we live just south of Salt Lake City, Utah, in a Zone 6B garden. And we have long, cold winters, not as cold as some of you. I recognize that, but we do have long, harsh, cold winters. And so we wanted to figure this out. And so let me tell you what is possible for you so that you guys understand what you can make happen in your garden. So that year, it was 2009, we decided to build a cold frame and a hoop house, just one of each. We were kind of just test driving it. And so we planted a garden that August for our year-round garden, what was supposed to be our year-round garden. And we started harvesting from that garden in October of that year. We have had something available in our garden to harvest every day since, okay? That's the possibility that you guys have. Coming up on 15 years. In October of this year, it will be 15 years that we have had this chance to harvest something from our garden. Now, we don't harvest every day, obviously, especially in the wintertime when there's snow and stuff. We'll kind of wait till things warm up a little bit and we'll go out and harvest enough for a week or so. But there has always been something available in our garden for 15 years now, 365 days a year. So it's really possible for you. Those of you that live, and I saw people in Texas and areas like that, zones 8, 9, and 10, this should be a relatively easy thing for you to do. A hoop house or a cold frame and a few things like that, and you should be able to have a pretty good winter garden. In fact, a lot of you will probably have a harder time with your summer garden than you will with a winter garden in those zones. For those of us that live in zones 5, 6, and 7, which are kind of the zones that are around me, you're going to really benefit a lot from the principles of year-round gardening. You're going to love the fact that you can all of a sudden grow 30 different crops all the way through the winter. And you'll have stuff for you to harvest in your cold frames and your hoop houses all year long. You're really going to benefit a lot. Those of you that live in the colder areas, zones 3 and 4, it's going to be a lot harder for you to do. It's not impossible, but it is a bit harder. And so you will be growing a limited number of crops. There's maybe only about a dozen or so that you'll be able to grow all year long, but you'll also be able to extend your growing season where you may normally only have like a 3-month growing season. You'll be able to stretch that out to like a 6-month growing season, 6 weeks on each side to get longer, using all of these things. Plus, there are some things, even in zones 3 and 4, that will overwinter. And all the snow that you guys get will be a complication for you, but it's also going to be a benefit, because when you've got 2 feet of snow on top of a cold frame, the cold frame itself is nice and toasty warm because that snow acts as a great insulator. So there are even things in those colder zones that you'll be able to do. So it's possible for all of you to be able to do some form of year-round gardening, or even if you don't want to do gardening in January, you still can use the principles that we're going to teach, and especially the structures that we're going to learn about today, to extend that growing season, to stretch out the amount of time that you're able to harvest from your garden. You'll be able to plant earlier and harvest later from using these different things that we're going to talk about. So 3 ways. There are 3 important things that you need to know to extend your garden. The first is you need to choose the right crops, which is what we talked about on Monday. Then plant at the right times, which is what we talked about on Wednesday. And then today we're going to talk about how to protect your crops using several different structures, okay? So while we're kind of taking just a really quick break here, we're up to about 70 people. How many of you have ever grown something in the winter before? Let me know in the comments if you have grown something in the winter before. Maria is saying Caleb Warnick has a good winter garden book. Oh, that's cool. I don't know Caleb, but I know of him. He's here in Utah. I'll have to look at that. So who's grown some stuff in the wintertime before? Ning is saying that he or she tried last winter. Holly has grown kale in the winter. Nikki says she has. David, kale, spinach, and lettuce. Charlene is saying only in the summertime. Anne is saying kale. Grew carrots last year in Ohio, kind of as a test. Brassicas from Nikki. Onions, garlic, broccoli, cabbage, lettuce, and carrots from Rose. Okay, great. Yes, mosh, parsley, and lettuce from Julie. I love hearing that people are growing mosh because that's a fun crop to grow. All right, so let's go ahead and kind of move forward. So we're going to talk today about protecting our crops and what we can do to protect our crops. And we're going to talk about row covers, hoop houses, and cold frames, and how and where to use those. I'm going to give you some pointers on building them as well. So let's I want to do just a really quick review. So this will just be for those of you that maybe weren't here earlier in the week. One of the most important things is we have to get the timing right. And we're going to be using these structures to protect our crops, but our crops have to be mature before the cold weather and the low light days come. And so we need to get them planted at the right time. And so let me just give you some direction there. We want to start direct sowing seeds in our gardens about 6 weeks before our first frost date. 6 to 8 weeks. You've got a window of about 2 weeks. If you don't have room in your garden, because like for me, that time frame is August 1st. So we usually have our first frost about October 1st, which 8 weeks before that is about August 1st. I don't have a lot of room in my garden. I save some room for carrots so that I can plant fall carrots, but I don't have a ton of other space. And so instead, I start seedlings indoors at the same time, okay? So all of our leafy greens and those plants that you want to grow, we would start those seedlings at that same time, 6 to 8 weeks before our first frost indoors, okay? Now, if you want to grow brassicas, so cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, kohlrabi, and Brussels sprouts, those we actually want to be putting transplants in the garden about 6 weeks before our first frost date, which means we need to be starting them sooner than all of the other crops that we're going to talk about. So those brassica family crops, you need to get started about 12 to 14 weeks before your first frost date. So here you go. Let me do this. I have already started. What is this? This is Pac-Man broccoli. So I have already started my broccoli. We're just starting to see the first formation of true leaves. Those are still seedling leaves, but I can see the true leaves coming there. And so these are about a week old, and these will be ready to go out about 6 weeks before our first frost date. So if you want to grow brassicas, pretty much now is the time to get those started indoors. So you do want to focus hard on getting some brassicas planted now, okay? The other thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you add some time to your maturity dates. So look at the maturity dates on the back of your seed packages and choose the plants that have the shortest maturity dates. Because in the fall, it ends up adding about 15 days to our maturity dates because the temperatures are getting cooler, the light is going down. And so, for example, a broccoli that we really like is the Watham broccoli that I talked about last time. It matures in 90 to 100 days. Well, that's 115 days in the fall, whereas other varieties like Pac-Man, which I'm growing, are only about 70 days to maturity. So that's 85 days. That's a big difference. 85 to 115 is the difference between whether or not that crop's going to get mature. So choose varieties that have shorter maturing dates as well for your fall and winter planting. So here's a few crop ideas for you. Fall crops would be things like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and kohlrabi. All of those we want to get started indoors right about now, okay? Those plants will need to be harvested before the really cold, hard winter weather comes for those of us that live in those cold zones. Those of you that live in Texas and in the warmer areas, zone 8, zone 9, zone 10, those will actually grow during the wintertime for you. But for those of us that live in the colder areas, we want those to be mature about the time the really cold weather starts settling in. For me, that's about the first part of November that we want those to be mature. So that's why we get them going so early now. Then we also have things like lettuce, beets, and turnips. Those are, I consider them fall crops, but really they kind of meld into the winter as well. So we end up, our lettuce, our beets, our turnips, and a few things like that will actually go all the way through the early part of the winter. And when I'm talking early winter, I'm not talking about December 21st when we hit the winter solstice. I'm talking about when the cold weather starts coming. So for me, that's about the first part of November. You guys, it'll be a little bit different, but we should be able to get most of, lettuce, beets, turnips to kind of blend into that early winter as well. So they're a fall crop, but they're also kind of an early winter crop, if that makes sense. And then winter crops that are going to make it all the way through the winter, if we give them the protection that we're going to talk about here in just a second, would be things like kale, spinach, mosh, arugula, carrots, parsnips, Swiss chard. The list is actually pretty huge. There's about 30 different things, most of which are leafy greens, a few root crops as well, like carrots, Swiss chard, or carrots and parsnips, and there's a few others. But those crops can actually make it all the way through the winter. And you'll be able to harvest those kind of all the way through the winter. But for those, our planting date, again, is 6 to 8 weeks before our first frost date is when we want to get them planted. For the fall crops, same thing, 6 to 8 weeks before our first frost date. And we just eat those fall crops first, and then we move into these winter crops. But all of them need to kind of be maturing about that time that your 10-hour days start to arrive, okay? And then we're going to protect them and basically put them in cold storage for the winter. And that's kind of the whole idea behind year-round gardening. Most crops don't do a lot of growing during the winter if you live anywhere north, okay? There's just not enough sun. Once the sun gets less than 10 hours a day of total day length, there just isn't enough solar energy. And then the sun is far to the south as well. And we just don't have the solar energy that we need for those plants to actually do a lot of growing. And so we have to get them mature before that happens. And then we put them in cold storage, and we use row covers, hoop houses, and cold frames to protect them over the winter. So let's go through and talk about each one of these different protective structures, okay? And the very first one is heavy fabric row covers. Now, there's a difference, and I'm going to make this extra big, so hopefully you guys can see this. There's a difference between light and heavy fabric row covers, and it really does make a difference. We are looking for heavy fabric row covers. They're often labeled as frost blankets, and is what we want to do. They're measured based on weight, okay? And it's ounces per square yard is how the weight is. And so a heavy fabric row cover is anything from 1.5 to 2 ounces per square yard, okay? That's a heavy fabric row cover. If you are looking at a manufacturer that's not telling you what the weight is, that's probably not the best choice. They're probably some fly-by-night company from China or somewhere like that doesn't really know what they're doing. So you want to be looking at row covers that are 1.5 to 2 ounces per square yard. Light fabric row covers, which we use for light fall frosts and for getting extra early crops in the spring and protecting our crops from pests, those are usually labeled 0.65 to 0.9 ounces per square yard. Okay, that's light fabric row covers. We do not want those for winter gardening. Medium weight fabric row covers are anything from 0.9 to about 1.5. And in my personal opinion, those are worthless. They're just not quite heavy enough to give you the winter protection. They're too heavy to function as a row cover for pest protection in the summertime. And so stay away from the medium weights. You want heavyweight row covers, okay? Those row covers should protect down to about 24 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? Usually they'll give you about 8 degrees of protection with those plants. Celsius there is going to be what, about -10, -12? Somebody help me out. I should have done the conversion beforehand, but so those of you that do your temperatures in Celsius, it's going to be right around -10-ish is how those are going to protect too. And so we want to use those, and there's a broad range of uses for these fabric row covers. So you're going to use them to protect your crops over the winter time, but you can also use them to protect your crops from early fall frost. So it happens to us like every other year. We'll have a frost on like October 2nd, and then 2 days later, it's back up to 80 degrees. And if we didn't have heavy fabric row covers to protect our tomatoes and squash and things like that, we would miss out on 2 or 3 weeks of growing time because of that freak early frost, okay? Same thing can happen in the spring. You get a late frost. And so heavy fabric row covers are fantastic for that and can really help to extend and protect your crops. But they also do really well in the winter time to help add additional protection. And you can put them inside your cold frames and your hoop houses. And they're just amazingly handy to have. So if nothing else from these workshops, if you learn that you should buy some heavy fabric row cover, you will be in a lot better situation. I have so much fabric row cover. We bought some, we've inherited some from my father-in-law, and I literally could probably cover my entire garden in fabric row cover, heavy fabric row cover now. But here's the nice thing about them. The first year that we gardened for year-round gardening, so 2009, I bought 2 big pieces of heavy fabric row cover. They were 8 foot wide by 20 foot long, and I cut them both in half and made 4 pieces out of them. I still have and actively use all 4 pieces of those row covers that I bought 15 years ago. So that's one of the great advantages of the heavy fabric row cover, is that it lasts a long, long, long time. Those 4 are still in good shape. They've got some tears. I mean, 15 years of wear and tear is going to, do some things. They've got a few holes here and there, but overall they're in really good shape and last forever. So you really should get some of those. Now, recommended varieties or brands. Unfortunately, back 15 years ago, I didn't know I was going to be teaching people about this. And so I didn't keep track of the brand that I bought 15 years ago. I bought them from a farm store that isn't even open anymore. And so I don't know what brand they were. But since then, we have bought several other brands. And I have 2 that I want to recommend to you. One is called Agribond. It is usually sold by bigger nurseries and things like that. Johnny Seeds is one of the places that I see it for sale quite often. You can buy it in big rolls. If you've got, more commercial scale, you can buy, 100 yards at a time of that. So that's called Agribon, but you can also just buy it for garden applications. The other one that I have liked so far, and we've been using several of these for several years, is called Ag Fabric. So AG Fabric, Ag Fabric. That one is a little more readily available. I see it on Amazon quite often. It's available at some of the smaller seed companies and garden supply companies. That's often the brand that you'll see for sale in your local nurseries or your farm stores and stuff like that. So the two that I recommend, Agribon and Ag Fabric, are the two that I think are really good quality that you should be using, okay? All right, so that is heavy fabric row covers, a very important part of your year-round gardening, okay? Now let's talk about hoop houses. And so that people know, and I noticed a couple of people in the comments have mentioned greenhouses. Everything that we have talked about and everything that I've taught you over the past week can be done in a greenhouse and can be done in a high hoop as well. The reason why I don't really talk about them a lot is because most of the people that I'm working with are just small gardeners. We live on a 1/4 acre lot in the suburbs of Salt Lake City, Utah. About half of our backyard is garden, but we really don't have a giant garden. I mean, it's giant compared to most people, but it's really not giant. I don't have space for a big greenhouse. I don't have space for a high hoop or anything like that. And so everything that I teach will apply in a greenhouse or a high hoop, but I just try to teach the stuff that's a little bit more affordable. You can build a mini hoop house for $50, and even with today's prices. And so I try to just kind of keep things in reach of everybody. And so that's why you don't hear me talk too much about greenhouses and high hoops, only because I'm just trying to keep this discussion affordable and realistic so that you're not having to go out and spend thousands of dollars to build this beautiful greenhouse or something like that. So that's why you hear me talk mostly about mini hoop houses and cold frames. So you can see here in this picture, this is one of our mini hoop houses. We have 3 mini hoop houses that we use, 2 of which are permanent and are affixed to our beds. And we got fancy a couple of years ago when we built frames and then attached the PVC pipe that makes the hoops to those frames. And then we attach those frames to our raised beds using hinges, okay? And then that makes them really easy to open, to vent, to harvest, whatever it is that we need to do. They're really, really, really easy to work with. So we like that, okay? But you do not have to be as fancy as we are with that. Hoop houses can be very inexpensive and very simple structures. They do offer quite a bit more protection from the cold and the wind than a fabric row cover does, mainly because we're going to cover them with a plastic that keeps the wind out. It keeps the snow out. It keeps those colder temperatures out longer and better than a fabric row cover does. And so they do offer a higher level of protection. And usually, and this is one thing, let's just go ahead and talk here about how to build them. So we just use 1/2-inch PVC pipe. You could, if you wanted to, you could use electrical conduit, which would make them a slightly more sturdy, quite a bit more expensive though. And you also have to have something to bend the electrical conduit into shape with, okay? But you can just use PVC pipe. So we use 1/2-inch PVC pipe. We've been using the same 12 PVC pipe for 15 years. So it lasts forever. They kind of bend into that shape and then they stay in that shape. And so you're just going to bend those into a hoop shape. You usually want about 1 every 2 feet. So this is a 4 by 8 foot bed that you're seeing in that picture. And so we have 4 of them. And then you want to put a ridge pole along the top of those PVC pipes. The reason why we want the ridge pole is that creates stability in the structure. So it makes it more rigid, stands up better to the wind. If you don't have a ridge pole, even if you're using like an electrical conduit or something like that, it's not going to be as structurally sound in the wind. And so a good ridge pole, on this one, in this example, you can see we use some scrap lumber to create that ridge pole. You could also use another piece of PVC. That's what we've actually done on the two hoop houses that we have now, is ran just another piece of PVC along there, and we just run a couple of screws through going along to attach them to that pole. And then you cover the entire structure with plastic. Now I've got here on this note, we use inexpensive painter's plastic. And you want to use, the thickness that you want is 3.5 to 5 mil, okay? Anything less than 3.5 is a little bit too thin, and it won't stand up to the winter weather well enough. And so 3.5 to 5 mil is what I recommend that you use thickness-wise. But inexpensive painter plastic is fine. You don't have to go out and spend a fortune on greenhouse plastic. That's way, way, way more expensive. Some simple painter's plastic, as long as you bring it in during the summer. So don't leave it on your hoops during the summer. Bring it in, put it in your garage or something like that, and so that it's not out in the sun during the summertime. And that plastic should last you for several years. You should be able to get 3, 4, maybe even 5 seasons out of that plastic if you're careful with it. And it's like $15 for enough to do 2 hoop houses. And so it's very inexpensive. We end up, the hoop houses that we have now, that they're a little bit fancier, I think we probably spend about $65 on them. But before, I was like $35, $40 is all it was costing to build those. So you guys kind of just play with it, with your structure. Now, if you don't have raised beds, because I know I'm going to get this question, if you don't have raised beds, what do you do? If you're in-ground gardens instead, what do you do? And in that case, because one of ours we use out in our main garden, which is all in-ground. And we've got some 18-inch long pieces of rebar that we just bought from a home improvement store, and had them cut them for us into 18-inch lengths. And we pound those in and leave just about 6 inches out of the ground. And then we fit the hoops over the top of that rebar. Then we put the plastic over the top, and then we'll just secure the plastic to the ground with bricks and rocks and fence posts or whatever we've got, put some clamps on the end and kind of put it together. As long as you get everything kind of held down well, then it should work really well. And I teach you and actually show you how to build both versions, that version and then this version here, in the Year-Round Gardening Master Course. I kind of go through and show you the detail. Over the years, we've had 3 kind of different varieties, and so I show you how to build each one of those, okay? So again, probably with today's prices, I would imagine without putting the hinges on, you're probably looking at maybe $45 to $50 to build a hoop house. If you choose to do the hinged one, you're going to have to buy a little bit more lumber and some hinges, and so it may be another $15, $20, so maybe $75. If you can find, like me, I had some old hinges just hanging around and I didn't have to buy hinges. So look for recycled options, but hoop houses are very inexpensive, okay? Now, where do hoop houses work the best? If you live in zones 8, 9, and 10, a hoop house is really all you're going to need. You're warm enough, your winter temperatures don't get cold, super cold, at least compared to most of us. And so you should only need a hoop house. And maybe 9 and 10, you might not even need a hoop house. It would be nice to have, but you probably don't even need that. So hoop houses will work great in those zones. If you live in zone 7, it could be all you need, okay? But it depends on the zone 7 that you live in. So for example, most of the Wasatch Front, which is, we live here in south of Salt Lake City, most of the Wasatch Front is actually zone 7A. We're zone 6B just because we're a little bit closer to the river. But most of the Wasatch Front is zone 7A. But we have these long, cold winters with really long extended cold periods. And again, I know we don't get down to, below 0 very often, but we still have these long extended cold streaks where we're in the single digits for a month or more at night. and never get out of, get above freezing for sometimes 2 months at a time. And so we have that long extended season. And so a hoop house for a zone 7 like ours doesn't work really well, except for some of the hardiest plants. Things like kale and spinach and mosh, things like that will be okay. But if you live in like a zone 7, for example, I have a member of the Gardening Academy who lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and her garden is actually a 7B garden. Well, the only reason why it's a 7B garden is because Georgia usually will have a short time frame where they have a really cold spell, where the temperatures drop that actually get them down to qualify for that 7B for a little bit of time, but it's usually not a very extended amount of time. My daughter lived in Atlanta, and they weren't that cold for very long. And so if you live in that kind of a 7, then you probably are going to be okay with just a hoop house, okay? And then for those of you that live in zones 3 through 6, a hoop house is going to be good for only the really super hardy plants. So things like kale, Swiss chard, maybe carrots, mosh, spinach, and that's about it, okay? Everything else is probably going to need to be in a cold frame instead. If you live in zone 3, you're probably not going to be able to overwinter things in a hoop house at all. It's just going to be too cold for you. Those of you that get, you'll have extended amounts of time below 0 Fahrenheit, and you're probably not going to be able to pull that off in a hoop house. But a hoop house would still be really handy for season extension. But for those of you that live in those really cold zones, you're going to want to probably upgrade to a cold frame instead. So a cold frame, I'm going to take just a quick break. A cold frame is a box, usually made out of wood, with some type of glass lid on it. And the reason why it's so much better is because the wood and the glass offer so much more insulation value than plastic does on a hoop house, or than a fabric row cover does. And so a cold frame, and the other thing is cold frames are much lower profile as well. So they don't catch as much wind. You're going to be growing shorter crops in those. And so they are very good for growing the hardy crops. And I love them. They're the highest level of protection. We actually have 3 cold frames that we built. One of them we built 15 years ago. The other 2 we built 14 years ago. And we have loved having them in our garden. They can be a little bit more expensive to build. So let me show you. This is one of mine right after I first built it. So this was 14 years ago. And back then, it cost me about $125 to build one of those, because we used plexiglass for the lids. So we bought 2 by 4 foot pieces of plexiglass and built frames around them, and that's what we use for our lids on our cold frames. Plexiglass is a lot more expensive now, and lumber is moderately more expensive now than it was 15 years ago. And so I would say if you were building a cold frame like mine now, you'd probably be somewhere around $200 to $225. So it can be more expensive, but you do have a lot of recycled options that can bring the price of a cold frame down a ton. Number one, depending on the size, you may be able to come up with, scrap lumber, lumber off of Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or places like that are inexpensive or maybe even free. And then the other thing that you can do with a cold frame is you can use old windows, old storm doors, old sliding glass doors. People are replacing and getting rid of those kind of things all the time. Check with your neighbors, check with your family, look on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or places like that. You should be able to find very inexpensive windows, very inexpensive doors, storm doors and things like that you can use for the glass option for your cold frames, which will bring the price down dramatically. If you're paying $15 for a 4 by 4 foot window instead of, for a 4 by 4 foot of plexiglass, you're probably looking at $75 now. It's going to make a big difference. So look for those recycled options, because they're going to work just as well, and you'll be able to just put those on top of the wooden frame that you create. I've even seen people build cold frames out of like straw bales. So they'll just use straw bales as the outside structure and then put glass windows or things like that on top. And those work very, very well also. So lots of options, but ultimately, for those of you, especially that live in the colder areas, cold frames are going to offer you the most protection and give you the most options for your winter crops. Like I say, we have 3 of them that we grow in each year. And we usually have a full bed of spinach in one and a full bed of carrots in another. And then the other one will kind of be a mixture of a lot of different leafy greens, maybe some beets and turnips and some radishes and things, kind of just a good mix of other things. And all of those make it all the way through the winter. And we're able to do that in those hoop houses. So where do we use cold frames? They are overkill if you live in zones 8, 9, and 10. Now, if you want to build a cold frame and you live in those zones, go for it, but you don't have to have one in those zones. You're warm enough at the winter time that cold frames are kind of overkill for you. You're going to spend a lot of time venting those cold frames and having to keep the heat down because on a warm day, they get pretty hot. And so they may be overkill for you in those zones. For zones 6 and 7, they're going to be perfect for you to have. You're going to love having them. You're definitely going to need them for some of your less hardy crops, but you're going to appreciate them. We love having ours. We grow more in our cold frames than we do in our hoop houses, just because they are so much more protective. If you live in zones 3, 4, and 5, cold frames are a must-have. So you're going to have to come up with a good, well-insulated cold frame in order for you to be able to pull off this whole winter gardening thing if you live in those colder zones. That's the only way you're going to be able to do that. A greenhouse can also offer a lot of that same type of protection as a cold frame does. And in fact, let me talk about that just really quick. So a greenhouse, anything that I teach you or tell you about in a cold frame, is going to work equivalently well in most greenhouses because they're going to offer that more protection because they've got those thick insulated windows and wood frames and structures. So, okay, so that is our just different options. So while we're kind of hanging out here for a second, let's take a minute and tell me what you're going to use. Which one of these 3 options are you going to use this year? I would love to hear what you guys are going to build. Debbie's saying she has a marketplace online with Facebook that sells and gives away lots of things. There's all kinds of places like that, guys, that you can find to build those, those structures. What is the free? My daughter was here. She'd be able to tell us. There's a marketplace where the only things that can go on it is free things. So if you're giving away free things, I can't remember the name. I'll have to try and remember that name and put it in the comments of the video. But those are all good options. So Ning is saying he's going to have he's got some old windows for some cold frames and maybe a mini hoop house. Free Cycle. There we go. Ning, thank you. It's Free Cycle. Yes, freecycle.org. There should be hopefully some local there. Hoop house for Liz. Debbie's saying hoops over her raised beds. Probably a mix of all 3 from Robin. She's a microclimate of zone 3B. You're gonna need them. Buy Nothing group on Facebook has free items. Good. That's good suggestions as well. So any of those options, if you don't want to invest the money to build something like I did originally, any of those options are going to be great places for you to find these materials. Okay. All right. So we're getting pretty close to question time. If you want to start asking any questions, you can go ahead. Remember to put 3 question marks before those, and we'll go ahead and get those answered. Just a quick reminder, I put the slide back up again for those of you that haven't been to the first 2 lessons. We did do 2 other lessons on the best veggies to grow and when to plant. And those lessons are in the links or the description of this video, so that you can go back and watch those if you would like. Okay. All right. Let's do our prize drawing. So we're going to give away a free copy of the Year-Round Gardening Master Course again today. So go ahead in the comments and comment Winter Garden, 2 words, And everybody that comments will be entered into the drawing, and then we will give away a copy. If you happen to have already bought a copy of it and you are the winner, we'll give you a refund. So go ahead, or if you want, we might offer you an equivalent course. You know, if you've already bought it and you would instead like my seed starting course or something like that, we can do that too. But everybody enter, even if you already own the course, and we'll get you entered. So what we're going to do is we're going to give it about 5 minutes here for AJ to get those collected, and then we will go ahead and announce the winner of that. Okay. All right. While we're doing that, though, let's talk a little bit about the Year-Round Gardening Master Course. How many of you would like to have 365 days a year of fresh food from your garden, like we do? We love the fact that we can go out any time of the year and harvest from our garden. We have tons of spinach and carrots all winter long, lettuce up until Christmas, and then again really early in the spring. We have kale, and kale, by the way, in the wintertime is amazing. It's not a totally different vegetable. So Sherry is saying that they want, Rita's saying most definitely, Samantha, me. So what would it mean to your family's diet? It made a big difference to us when we started eating more fresh fruits or fresh vegetables, not any fruits, fresh vegetables during the wintertime. It made a big difference to how we eat, and still makes a big difference now, even though most of our kids are gone. AJ and I love the fact that we have all of this fresh produce all year long. That is what Year-Round Gardening offers for you. And I want to just invite you guys to join the Year-Round Gardening Master Course. So we love this course. This is my favorite time of year because I love this topic so much, and I get to talk about it so often during this time of year. And last year we were looking at the course, and I filmed it in 2015 originally. And we looked at it and we were like, you know what? It's looking a little aged. My camera equipment wasn't as good back then. My teaching skills weren't quite as good. And so this year we actually decided to fully upgrade the course. And so I have refilmed, it has a total of 65 lessons. I've refilmed all but 8 of them. The 8 that I haven't refilmed are the fall gardening ones, and we're going to refilm those this year while we're growing our fall garden. So by the end of the fall, the entire course will be completely updated. All new content. We've added several new lessons, brand new workbook that we just went through and revamped this week. And just a really fun, really good course that you are going to love. Everybody just enjoys it. Everybody that has taken this course. And today is really kind of the last opportunity for you to join and sign up with this course. So included in the course, 6 hours of instruction. There's like I said, about 66 lessons total that we go through. I tried to break everything up into small bite-sized pieces so that you don't feel like I'm sitting there for 45 minutes lecturing to you about mosh, so I tried to make things sharp and really, really good. Rose is asking a great question. So if she bought the former version, will she be getting the updated version? And the answer to that is yes. When you buy this version, you get any future updates. So Rose, your version is already updated. If you go in and look, it's already updated. In this course, we talk about what crops to grow. All of the different crops, we go through and cover all of those. The most important ones we cover in really depth and in detail. And then we cover all of the other crops that you can grow as well. We talk really in depth on protective structures. I go through and teach you how to build a cold frame. I teach you how to build a couple of different versions of hoop houses and how to use those, how to manage them, because we have to deal with, in the fall and in the spring, we have to deal with heat. If it gets 60 degrees one day, it might be 80, 85, 90 degrees inside your hoop house or your cold frame. So we have to know how to manage that and deal with that. We're going to talk about all the planting times and when you get those crops planted and how to get them mature at the right time. We're going to talk about care and harvesting. There's actually not a ton of care that actually has to happen during the winter. So, that's one of the beautiful things about winter gardening is there's very few bug problems. You don't have weeds. Very seldom do you have to water. I usually don't water my winter garden from about mid-November until the first part of March. No watering to do. All you have to do is harvest, and it's amazing. It's great. It's fun. And so it doesn't add a lot of burden to you during the wintertime. It's not like your summer garden. All you have to do is go out and harvest during those cold winter months. And so it's beautiful. And we talk about that a lot. We also have modules on fall and spring gardening individually. So we talk about how to kind of use all the structures that you have to extend that growing season into the fall and into the spring. Some of the specifics about fall and spring gardening that are a little bit different than the winter gardening as well. So we have modules that are specific on that. And then you also get the bonus during the summertime. So during the July, mid-July to mid-August timeframe, we do live Q&A sessions as well. So you will get those as well. And it's not like this where you're typing in your question and I read it back. It's actually, we do it on a Zoom call so that you can interact with me and get feedback, and I can ask you exactly where you live, when your frost dates are, and get your situation or your question resolved. AJ says that's the best part of the course. Those live Q&A sessions, we usually do, one a week, and they're usually about an hour to an hour and a half long, and love those as well. And it's a great chance for you to interact with me and for me to interact with you and get to know you. So couple of just maybe comments here from people that have taken the class. This class was absolutely amazing. It was an absolute game changer for me. Never again will I think gardening ends in the summertime. That's Laura said that. And you can see her cool little hoop houses. And look, she was creative. She did them differently than I teach, which is awesome. She just took the principles and created these little hoops that go up, and they're just half hoops up against her house. How awesome is that, that she came up with that? Here's Richard, who actually lives relatively close to us in Tooele, which is only about 40 or 50 miles away. We loved our winter garden here in Tooele, Utah. The picture attached was taken on February 20th, 2024. The little finger carrots and the Bloomdale spinach harvest that day were tasty, and especially the sugary sweet carrots. We'll be growing both through every winter now. So much fun. Thanks for offering such a great course. So Richard and Laura both love this course. If you go to the sales page, you're going to see a lot more people that really love growing and learning from this course. This is maybe just a few examples of things that you can get. These are our gardens. So this is one of our lettuce beds. That one looks like we've got some leaf lettuce and then some butter crunch lettuces going. I would imagine that this was probably late November, early December that we took that picture. This one has some Asian greens in it, along with several different types of lettuce. Again, probably taken early December when we took that picture. This one is one that we took probably in, I don't see any snow outside, but I would imagine it was probably in late December, early January that we took this picture. And this is a bed of carrots. So we did a full 4x8 foot bed of carrots in a hoop house and did really well. So there is just so much potential with year-round gardening. And now, why do we talk about it now? We talk about it now because a lot of you are going to have to be starting to plant in the next 3 or 4 weeks. And so that's why we learn about it in July so that we can be ready when the time comes to get planted. So we're on sale now, and we only open this course up once a year, July 8th through the 15th. So we're right smack in the middle of it. We've already had over 50 people join us, and the one-time price is $129. And that's a one-time price. So like I was telling Rose earlier, any updates, any changes I make to the course, you get it. You get those. So the course is a live course that's on I'm sorry, it's not live. They're all pre-recorded, but it's a living course basically on our website, the Online Gardening School. And so anytime I make changes, everybody gets those changes anytime we make updates. And so it's kind of a living course that we can, if I get a consistent question, I'll jump on and do a whole video on it to answer that question. And so it's a fun course, and you'll have ongoing access to it. You can watch it as many times as you want. We do a big deal in July and August and go through it together as a group. But on day one, you have access to the full course. If you want to sit down for 6 hours or 3 hours, if you plan on double speed, you can watch the whole thing. Okay. So you're gonna, again, love this course and love having access to this course. Now, today, and this is the last day that we're going to be offering this, we do have an extra special workshop special for those of you that are here today and that are also watching the replay later, because we had about 600 people that were registered for this event. So I'm sure quite a few of you will be watching later. You can get access to the course for only $99. So we're knocking $30 off of the price, and you get a free bonus as well. You get our $20 succession planting mini course, which goes along really well with year-round gardening. So in this little course, I teach you kind of the 3 different ways that you can succession plant, planting one after another, or planting, every 3 weeks, or the other is intercropping and planting, slower growing with faster growing and things like that. And I go through and teach all of those to you as well. And you get that course for free. So you get the $129 year-round gardening course plus the $20 mini course for the $99 if you take advantage of the special. So there's a link in the description of this video, or it's the pinned link in the comment section. Click on it and go buy today. This offer goes away. Everything closes up on Monday the 15th, and we're going to go work through the course, and probably won't be open again until next year. So now is the time to jump in there and join that course. So I would encourage you to go click on that and check it out, because I know you're going to love it. It is a fun course. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and announce our winner. Okay. So we're going to give away a free copy of the year-round gardening course, and I'll also give you the mini course too. And the winner for today is Harvey Novak. Okay. So congratulations, Harvey. And is what I need you to do, Harvey, is shoot me an email. It's rick@ourstoneyacres.com. And I will verify your email address against the people that are registered live here to make sure that it's really you. And then you will win. Then is what we'll do is we'll set you up an account on our website, and then we'll give you free access to the course. So congratulations, Harvey. And hopefully you will enjoy this free course. Okay. All right. Let's see. Should we answer some questions? Yes, let's answer some questions. All right. Wow. Still 75 people here. Awesome. All right, let's tackle some questions. So we're about an hour. We're 57 minutes right now that we have been here. I usually give out at about an hour and 15 minutes is when my voice starts to give out. So let's see if we can get all of these questions answered. We've got 13 questions here already. So let's see if we can tackle those questions, and we'll kind of see where we go from there. So again, remember, if you have a question, throw in some question marks in front of it. That will kind of help us fish those out from amongst the other conversations that are happening and going on during the chat. All right, so Sabrina is asking, should I still use row cover if inside my greenhouse, zone 6B? Yes, that is a beautiful part of having some fabric row covers, is they're going to add additional protection. And even inside your greenhouse, during the coldest time of the year, you're going to want to throw some fabric row cover over. So I do that in my hoop house. I do that in my cold frames. And for me, the coldest time of year is usually about Christmas until Valentine's Day. Basically, Christmas to Valentine's Day is our coldest time of the year. That's when nighttime temperatures are going to be in the teens and the single digits. We seldom see temperatures above freezing during the day. That's our cold time. And during that time, nothing is growing. So covering it with fabric row cover is not going to prevent it from growing, because it's done growing. So we're adding that extra fabric row cover is just going to add that extra layer of protection to keep those plants harvestable and help them to go through the winter. So for that coldest period, you want to make sure that you put those greenhouse, hoop house, cold frame, whatever it is, you're going to throw some extra fabric row cover in there, and that's going to make a big difference in how long your plants survive. Okay. All right. Jen is saying, I'm going to try and build a cold frame. My son bought me an inexpensive greenhouse that I will try to use until it gets too cold. Maybe put a cold frame in the greenhouse. Okay, that's a great idea. And it accomplishes the same thing as the fabric row covers do. Elliot Coleman has another book. So I showed you guys this book. This is 4-Season Harvest. He has another book that's called, somebody help me out if you've read it. I think it's called The Winter Harvest. It's another book. He only wrote 3 books. One of them doesn't have anything to do with winter gardening, and the other 2 do. So just look up Elliot Coleman. It's more designed for more like commercial growers, people that grow for market farms and stuff, because he lives in New Hampshire, I think, and Zone 5, and he grows in the wintertime and has a market and everything. And so that book is more designed for those type of growers, but he talks about a lot in that book about the fact that they put up a high hoop and then they put a cold frame inside the high hoop for that extra layer of protection. And so, yes, Jen, you could do the same thing in a greenhouse. You just got to make sure you got access, that you can get in there and actually access things. All right, Holly, does a cold frame rest on the ground or off the ground? So when you build a cold frame, and I didn't mention this in this video, we talk about it a lot on the master course. It's actually going to be sitting on the ground unless you're building it to put on a raised bed. So you can build them to put on a raised bed, and then you'll kind of just maybe attach them with some brackets or something so it doesn't blow off during the winter. But normally they are going to rest on the ground, and so to help to protect the wood, we usually put a little. You can buy they call them furring strips. And they're just little like 1/4-inch strips of wood, very inexpensive. They're like 50 cents for an 8-foot piece of them. And you put those furring strips on the bottom of the cold frame, and that protects the lumber. And so instead of the bottom of your cold frame rotting, the furring strips rot from the contact to the ground. So that's kind of what you do. But yes, they usually are just going to rest right on the ground. Sherry is saying, can you describe how you arrange straw bales around a cold frame, and how do I make one side higher? Okay, so with a straw bale cold frame, you're probably not going to have a higher side. That would get complicated. So you're just going to create a center structure. And you're just going to put those straw bales in a square with an open center, and that's where your crops are going to be planted. So you can see there's some disadvantages to that. The straw bales are 2 feet wide at least, and so you're losing a lot of space because of that. But it's also really inexpensive. I mean, you can buy straw bales for hopefully $7 or $8. I don't know. I haven't bought straw for a long time, but it's what it used to be. And then again, just throw like an old storm window or something like that. So it's an inexpensive way to do it. And in that case, you're just going to have to ignore the elevation. The elevation, mine are 12 inches in the back, 8 inches in the front. And the main advantage of that elevation on your cold frames is it lets a little bit more sun in during the really low sun times of the year. But it also allows the water and the rain to kind of run off, and the snow as it melts to kind of run off. And so that's why we have that slope on it. And so with a hay bale or a straw bale cold frame, you just ignore that fact. You kind of just have to live without it, if that makes sense. All right, Caitlin, does it really matter, or does depth really matter? I have a 2-foot deep raised bed, and I would like to utilize those and build a cold frame to be attached on top, instead of building something separate. Okay, so yes, Caitlin, that's a great idea. So a 2-foot raised beds with a cold frame on top. Ultimately, raised beds are not quite as good for winter gardening as in-ground is, because they're a little bit higher up. There's a little bit more air exposure. They freeze a little bit faster. But yeah, 2 foot is plenty deep. And then you could put a cold frame on top of that. And that's an amazing idea. I've seen lots of people do that. Mine just happened to go, the cold frames go out in the garden and the hoop houses go on the raised beds. So, but yeah, that idea is great to put a cold frame on top like that. Mark, I plan on building a cold frame. I've seen YouTube videos of gardeners using large plastic storage bins as cold frames. What is my opinion on this? Okay, great idea. I actually did a video on that. The only problem with that is you don't quite get as much insulation value, if that makes sense, because you don't have the wooden sides. So there, there's a little bit less. That plastic from those clear bins doesn't offer as much cold protection on the sides as the wood, structured wood. So maybe not quite as much protection, but yeah, that's a fun idea. I did a video on it, and the year that we experimented with that, we just used it to get planted really, really early. So we took a couple of those clear plastic bins and put them out in the garden, let them warm up the soil, and then we took them off and planted, and then got an extra early crop. So I think we planted in February. Like mid-February is when we planted in those. So yeah, those are fun ideas. They won't quite offer as much protection as a cold frame would. They're also more liable to blow away. A cold frame is probably not going to blow away, whereas those, you're going to have to do some weighting down to keep those guys from blowing off. But still fun ideas, and you can experiment. It kind of depends on where you live. Roots to Refuge, I think that's what it's called. She did a really fun video on that too, where she just planted the crops in a bag of potting soil. She just cut open the potting soil and then put the plastic on top. And I thought that was a fun idea too. So you could look at those, but yeah, those are all fun ideas. Not quite as hardy. So it depends on where you live. If you lived in zone 4, you're probably not going to have, you would have an extended harvest from that, but you're probably not going to have an all winter harvest. So kind of just depends. Okay. Sherry is asking, I haven't figured out how to use my western wall. It holds a lot of heat. It's about 2 feet wide and too hot in the summer, but I'd like to utilize it at least in the fall. Any ideas? So so I'm assuming, I guess the only problem, a northern wall would be your best choice. The only problem, Sherry, that I think that I would see with that is that wall is going to, on the west, is going to really limit the amount of sun that you get in the afternoon. Assuming I'm following your orientation correctly. So the wall is on the west side of your garden. That means that there would be there would be shade from that wall in the afternoon. And so that's going to limit the amount of sun that those beds get, which means they're going to freeze harder. That could be the only real issue that I could see them, them causing. If you had crops planted right up against that west wall, they wouldn't get enough sun, both in the fall to get growing and then to kind of keep them preserved in the wintertime. That would be my only worry. I had a friend who had a north wall, so it was on the north side of her garden, and she planted her winter garden up against that, and it was beautiful. It was amazing because it didn't cause any shadows. It helped to absorb heat. It reflected more sunlight. It was just great. Her garden, we both planted on the same day because I taught her how to do it, and her garden thrived. Mine did too, but hers like way out thrived mine because it was right up against that south facing wall, and south facing north side of her garden. So the west wall, I would be a little bit worried about those shadows, if that makes sense. Patsy, if you have lots of spinach, are you sowing seeds at different times for fall and winter? No. You in order to, if you want to harvest during the winter, you've got to get them all in 8 weeks before your first frost. 6 to 8 weeks, you've got that window. Anything you plant after that won't be available until spring. It won't get big enough to harvest. And so you'll have to wait until the sun comes back and they start growing again. So spinach, that time of year, spinach does not bolt. It doesn't. So you just grow a great big bed, plant it all at the same time. It's all going to be okay, because come November-ish, it's going to stop growing, and you're just going to harvest, and then it will start growing again in late February and take off again. But that whole time frame from for me at least, it's from about mid-October until March 1st, March 15th. It really doesn't do much growing. It kind of just sits. And so you don't have to worry about it bolting. It's just nice, sweet, tasty spinach. And so you can plant it all at the same time and it'll all be fine. You don't need to like succession plant that time of year, where, like you would in the spring. Okay, Sherry is saying, what are the lengths of your PVC poles for your hoop houses? So originally we bought 10-foot poles, and that's what we used. We used those poles for a lot of years, and which meant that at the peak, we were about 4.5-ish feet tall. About 4 years ago, I decided that was overkill. We really didn't need them to be that tall. And so I actually cut a foot off of each pole. And I may have even cut a little bit more off now. I can't remember when I built those. So they're only about 7 feet long. And so our peak is about 3 feet. And that's perfect because really the 4.5 feet was overkill. Nothing grows that big. The kale, even kale doesn't grow that big during the wintertime. And so we didn't really need that much space. And so I brought them down, cut them down, and I'm 98% sure they're 7 feet long now. And that gives us about 3.5 feet. That made them less liable to get blown over in the wind, because they're lower profile and everything. So that's kind of the height that I settled on. But originally we started with 10-foot poles, and that's probably the only length you're going to be able to buy them in. So you may be able to, cut those ends off and then use those, kind of cobble those ends together to use as your ridge poles. Betty, should I plant directly into my complete cold frame now? Isn't it too hot? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So your cold frame isn't going to go out until you're, like around your first frost date. So your cold frame just sets on top of your beds. And so you're going to plant now, but you won't put the cold frame out until fall, until you start to get cold temperatures. So we don't put our cold frames out until about October 1st. We don't really put the lids on unless we have a frosty night until about October 15th. So yeah, you've got plenty of time. You get your crops planted now, and you've got 3 or 4 months before you actually have to build your cold frame, if that makes sense. Okay. Ning is saying, if mosh grows even during the Persephone period, can or should you succession sow over fall and early winter? Yes, you definitely can with mosh. When I say that it grows, it doesn't grow like lettuce, okay, during that time frame. It's still fairly slow to grow, but it does grow versus everything else. So you could succession plant if you wanted. I honestly, again, it doesn't, even if mosh goes to seed, you can still eat it. It doesn't get bitter quickly like lettuce and stuff like that. And it's not going to go to seed over the winter. And so you could plant it all at one time and then just harvest from that bed all winter long. And you may end up having to rush a little bit towards the end of the season if you haven't used it all up. But the other nice thing about mosh is you cut the whole plant off. And so if you plant a whole bed and then you just start harvesting from one side, you can replant something else in the spaces that you're clearing as well. So unlike like spinach, you're gonna be picking leaves off of spinach. The mosh plants, you cut the entire plant off. You just harvest the entire plant. And so your succession planting in those beds is going to be planting something new once the mosh, even in the wintertime, you can plant other things. They may just sit until spring, but you'll be able to do that. All right, Lori. Okay. Let me do this. We're an hour and 15 minutes in. I've got 9 more questions. We're going to call it quits on the questions. So I'll answer the questions that we have right now, and then we'll call it quits so that we're hopefully done here in about 10 minutes. Lori says, if you double the painter's plastic on your hoop house, does it make any difference in protection? It will help a little bit. That added little bit of airspace will help a little bit. it's still not going to be as much as a plane of glass or a plane of plexiglass. It won't offer as much thermal protection. But yes, it would. If you could get clever about it and figure out how to put like one on the inside of the hoop and one on the outside of the hoop so that there was a significant like half-inch gap, that would be a little bit extra helpful because that air in between would help with insulation value. But yes, it would help, but it's not going to turn a hoop house into a cold frame protection-wise, if that makes sense. Okay. Nikki is asking if we paid in December, do we still get the upgrades or is it something different? Yes, Nikki, if you're already a member of the year-round gardening course and you bought it when we opened it up last year, all the upgrades are there already. So this is, and again, we're talking here about the year-round gardening course, not the Gardening Academy. But yes, if you already own the year-round gardening master course from prior years, you got all of the upgrades, and everybody that buys it now will get any additional upgrades that we do in the future. So yes, you've got them. They're already there. In fact, the changes are already there. Betty, are your lids removable so that you can take them off during warm weather? And do you angle the cold frame so that they face south? Yes, cold frames are always going to angle to the south. And yes, those lids will come off. I usually only prop one of them. So I'll open one on a warm day. And that's usually enough. You just need to make sure that the heat can escape. It's amazing how warm a cold frame can get. So the first couple of years, I don't do this anymore, but the first couple of years, just so that I kind of got the feel for what it was like in our area, I would put a thermometer in, and then I would go out in the middle of the day on a sunny day and check the temperature to see what it was like so that I knew. And, on a 55-degree day, my temperature will jump up inside the cold frame to about 85 degrees. So I usually will start venting anytime the temperatures get above 45 or 50 degrees. I will vent because it'll get a little bit too hot in those cold frames. So I'll open them up. So yes, my lids, I have 4 lids. They all just sit on top, and then we will secure them down so that they don't blow off in the wind. But I'll just prop one of them open is how I do the venting with those. And then the hoop houses will just open up. They just hinge open. Pete, is it a lifetime access price? Okay, so I don't promise lifetime access because if I die, I don't know what my kids are going to do with my video courses. Okay, so it's ongoing access. And if at any time we decided that we were no longer going to do the year-round gardening course, which I doubt will ever happen because it's our best-selling course. We've had it for 8 years now. But if at any time we decided that we weren't going to do it, we would offer you a download option. So you would be able to download it. Right now, it resides on our website, and you can access it. All you have to do is log in, and you can access it and watch it as many times as you want. So if for some reason we decided that we were no longer going to service that course, we would send you out an email and say, hey, go in and download this course. But that's probably not going to happen. But I can't promise lifetime because whose lifetime? My lifetime? Your lifetime? So we're not going to promise lifetime, but it's ongoing access to it. And if ever a situation arose where we were going to get rid of the course, we would give you the ability to download it so that you had a copy to keep. Okay. Maria, if you're going to group winter crops together in the same bed, what would you plant together? Honestly, the only thing you need to worry about, Maria, is size. Okay, so all of the crops, there really isn't any competitive crops. I'm not a big believer in companion planting, anyways. There's not a lot of science behind the companion planting stuff. So everything that we're talking about here are similar families. A lot of them are all in the same family. It's leafy greens, it's root crops. So it's more than anything, it's size. You don't want to plant spinach and kale in the same bed because the kale is going to get so big it's going to shade the spinach. Okay, so more than anything, you're thinking about size when you're grouping. You want to have kale and collards and Swiss chard and sorrel and things like that. You want those that are big plants all together, and those are probably going to go in a hoop house. And then you want lettuce and spinach and arugula and minzua and mustards and, those kind of plants that are smaller, you want those together in the same hoop house or cold frame so that we don't have competing sizes, if that makes sense. And then your root crops can pretty much just grow together. You can plant them together. So there's not a lot of grouping that you need to worry about. You're going to want to rotate away from those beds for a year or two and not winter garden so I don't winter garden in all of my beds. I have one. So our garden has a total of 5 4 by 24 foot long beds. And we only winter garden in about 1.5 of those every year. And then we rotate it around so that we're not constantly growing spinach in the same spot or lettuce in the same spot. But beyond that, there's not really any grouping that you need to fuss too much about, if that makes sense. Okay. Lori, I'm in zone 3. If I use a hoop house inside my greenhouse and row covers inside that, is that overkill? Probably not in zone 3. I would say it's probably overkill for me, but probably not overkill for you. But you wouldn't want to put that fabric row cover on until it really started getting cold. Okay, till it's once the nighttime temperatures are consistently going forward under 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, that's when you really start thinking about putting a fabric row cover on. Until then, you might as well just let them. They're going to be okay, even if the temperatures dip down to 25 or something at night. They're going to be all right. And so you might as well let them get as much sun as you can. As soon as you put those fabric row covers on, then you're kind of sealing the deal on the growth. They're going to stop growing because those fabric row covers are going to cut out another 50% of your already limited light. So just wait until you start really seeing consistent nighttime temperatures that are 20 degrees or below. Then go ahead and put that fabric row cover on. And yeah, for zone 3, it probably isn't overkill. A lot of other places it might be, but for you, it's probably not. Rick is saying, I'm in Northeast Ohio. When is the best time to start planting? Okay, so Rick, go back and watch Wednesday's video. And that's when I talk about it. But essentially, the planting times for most crops that we're talking about are going to be 6 to 8 weeks before your first frost date. And the other people that I know that live in Ohio, and I recognize Ohio is a fairly big state, but most of the people that I know are relatively similar to me in frost date and garden zone. And so I'm thinking, Rick, that you probably are going to be wanting to plant somewhere around August 1st to August 15th is kind of your target time. Okay. But that's a guess. You need to you need to base it on your actual frost dates. Okay. Holly, could I use heavier cloth protective row cover? Here in Georgia, it goes from 20 below at night, 40s and 50s during the day. Should I stick with plastic and open the ends during the day like I did in Houston and with occasional freezes? My garden is open, but I use cloth in the protected days. Holly, yours is a little bit, and when we do the Q&As, Holly, Holly's a member of the Gardening Academy, by the way. We could chat a little bit more about it then, so I could get a little bit more feedback. But in Georgia, I might argue that you could probably just use heavy fabric row cover on your hoops instead of plastic, so that you didn't, because when nights in the 40s and the 50s, heavy fabric row cover on your hoops is going to be fine. You're right. It's just those rare nights that you get when they drop down to 20, which I know that doesn't happen a ton in Georgia, but it does happen. Then you might, so I might have, if you're going to put heavy fabric row cover as you're covering on your hoops instead of plastic, then I might consider throwing some additional fabric row cover in there. Now, I will say this, Holly, one disadvantage of having the heavy fabric row cover on there instead of plastic is you're not going to get enough light penetration. So you are different than me. You're further, even though your garden zone is relatively similar number-wise, you're quite a bit further south than we are. And so your days are going to be longer and you're going to have a lot more growing time and growing potential. So that might argue that you should put plastic on and vent, because your total amount of time, your precipity months are going to be a lot shorter. I would imagine you're probably looking at maybe 2 months where you have 10-hour days. And so putting the heavy fabric row cover on your hoop houses is going to limit the amount of sun that can get in there. So you might want to have the plastic indent. Yeah, sorry, I kind of rethought that as I was talking through it. So yeah, that kind of would be my advice there. All right, last question. And then we'll kind of just run through and really quick and see if there's anything big happening in the comment section. David, any tips on sealing the ends of the hoop house with plastic? The curved part looks easy. Over the years, we have done it several different ways. Look at my hinged hoop. And I think I actually have a YouTube video on my hinged hoop too. But if you join the year-round gardening course, I really talk about it there. The ends on the hinged hoop house are just sealed, and I just use some furring strip. So I put the plastic down and then I just run some furring strip and run a few screws through that furring strip, and that holds the plastic on. That's what I did with my raised beds as well on the sides with some furring strips. Then on the ends, before we did the hinged hoop, you obviously have to make sure that you leave lots of plastic at the end so that you have plenty of plastic to cover everything up. And then I just would get, I've got some clamps. They're just they're relatively inexpensive. I got them at Harbor Freight. I don't know if you have Harbor Freight in your area, but you can get like a 10-pack of them for maybe $20. And I would just fold that plastic over and then clamp it with those clamps and kind of clamp it to the ends is how I did it. I've seen other people who have actually tied it together, kind of like bungee corded it together. So you collect it all kind of together and then put a bungee cord on it. That would work as well. Any of those ideas would, be equally effective for taking care of that. But look, if you go back, jump on my YouTube channel and go back and look, I've got some videos on hoop houses, and I did some before we did the hinged hoop, and then I also did some on the hinged hoop. So you can see what I did. We just kind of use some clamps, and you just make sure there's extra plastic at the ends so you've got enough to kind of fold it over, and then you just clamp it onto the PVC pipe, and it works really well. So that kind of worked out great. So, all right, that is all the questions. So let me just look really quick. Sherry's saying they used zip ties on the end of their hoop house last year. That's a good idea. Betty's saying, so with my cold frame already built, with dirt already in them, how do you pick them up in the spring? Okay, so again, Betty, if you've actually already built them, maybe shoot me an email with some pictures. Cold frames actually don't have bottoms, okay? So the cold frames that we're talking about just sit on top. You don't put dirt in the cold frames, okay? The cold frames sit on top of the dirt, or they sit on top of your raised bed. And that's how they work. So there isn't any dirt in them to move around. So you don't build. Our cold frames are not permanent structures. You don't put dirt in them. They don't have a bottom. You put them away during the summertime, and so they sit on top of the dirt, if that makes sense. Okay. Where would I do a hoop house, Angie, if you lived in an apartment? So Angie, that is a little bit tougher. You probably, if you're growing vertically, you're probably not going to be able to put a hoop over it. It might be too tall. So you would probably just use fabric row cover to help extend your growing season. If you're growing in containers, you could build some kind of a hoop structure to set over the top of your containers. So, Angie, if you want to kind of communicate with me, or if you're going to join the year-round gardening course, we can kind of play with a few ideas there. But it's a little bit tougher when you're in containers, and especially if they're vertical, if they're tall, you're going to need to probably not do a hoop, and instead you're probably just going to cover it with heavy fabric row cover and not have the expectation of making it all the way through the winter, unless you live in a pretty warm climate. But if you live, let's see, you said zone 5, yeah, 1st of September, zone 5, 1st of September. So yeah, you're probably in that situation. You're going to get an extended harvest, but you're probably not going to make it all the way through the winter because you're just going to have a hard time protecting that structure and those plants that are so tall like that. If that makes sense. Okay. All right, guys, I think that is it for our last workshop of this year. Now, we'll probably be doing some more workshops coming up but this is the last year-round gardening workshop. So we're thinking about doing some workshops about microgreens and sprouts a little bit later and a few things like that. So I'm sure we'll have more workshops coming up. We'll probably do some workshops on some Gardening Academy topics as well. So there will be some fun stuff coming up, but this is the last of the year-round gardening workshops. So if you didn't get a chance to watch the other ones, the links for the replays are in the description of this video. And then please make sure that you go and get access to the year-round gardening master course. It's on sale now. It's only on sale until Monday. And so you need to get joined. And this is the last offer that we have with the bonus course. So go ahead and click on the link down here in the description or up pinned in the comment section and go buy. We would love to have you be a part of that. $99 with the free bonus course. You guys are going to love that course. I know you're going to love it. We've had literally thousands of people go through that course and I've never had a complaint. Everybody likes it. And it's brand new this year too. So it's even better. All right. Thank you guys. AJ and I appreciate you and we appreciate everything that you do to support us and help us. It means a lot to us to have people here and so thank you very much for being a part of this. And let's get some fall and winter gardens planted this year. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you being here. Happy gardening. We'll see you later.